Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, and welcome to a live broadcast covering the breaking news. Julian Assange, WikiLeaks founder, has had his extradition request approved by the Home Office, by Home Secretary Priti Patel. It was entirely predictable, but I don't like to reduce things to what's unsurprising or surprising because then that doesn't give me a whole lot to do as somebody who's a journalist or a commentator on these pressing issues. And so there's a lot to say. There are important statements to be made. There are remarks that are being shared. As I go to record this, a press conference is winding down with Stella Morris, who is Julian Assange's wife and partner, and mother of two of his children, Gabriel and Max. And Jennifer Robinson was at the press conference. She's a longtime WikiLeaks attorney for Assange, and also Tim Dawson of the Free Press Association, which hosted the press conference. And there they shared what the next steps will be for Assange's legal team. They will be appealing the extradition decision by the Home Office to the High Court of Justice. And they'll be able to raise numerous issues that had been off the table because they initially prevailed at the district court level on the humanitarian grounds, on the grounds that it would be oppressive for health reasons to extradite Assange to the United States. And so there are various challenges that are available. But thank you for joining. Again, I'm Kevin Gosztola. The URL at the bottom is the newsletter that I curate, the Dissenter newsletter. There, if you subscribe, you can get updates to that is coverage of latest developments on Julian Assange's case, as well as other related whistleblower stories and in other stories on the war on WikiLeaks and the war on journalism globally. So thank you for tuning in. I'm not going to go very long. I'm putting together an interview for the Unauthorized Disclosure Weekly podcast with my co-host, Rania Kalik. We're going to talk to Stefania Marizzi, Italian journalist, who's one of the best and aggressive fighters out there, searching and trying to pry loose documents from these governments that have engaged in this war on Assange and WikiLeaks through the freedom of information laws that are available in countries which are implicated, like Australia, the UK especially, but even in the US and I think Ecuador and Sweden, that she has worked together and has written a book that is already out in Italy and is coming with a English translation in November of this year. So we're going to talk with her, and that'll be posted and should stream here on this channel. So hit that subscribe button. You'll know when that gets posted. And in general, share this and let people know that we're doing these kinds of streams, and that if anybody wants coverage of Assange from a reliable source, I've covered this for over a decade extensensively. I attended mostly remotely during the pandemic when it happened, but also one legal hearing I was able to get to London. I've covered all of these proceedings that have taken place in the extradition case in the UK. So I'm familiar with a lot of this and have a lot of background to bring to this Assange decision. And what we're talking about today, which is, as supporters have put it, another dark day for press freedom. I would agree. I would agree that this is another dark day for press freedom, for global press freedom. And what it does is laid out and articulated very well by Jennifer Robinson. And I have this clip from the press conference that was held at the Free Press Association following the decision from Patel's office. Jennifer Robinson, there was Stella and Tim, as I said. And just before this decision, I want everybody to know this, that the UK admitted in a settlement with Jennifer Robinson that they were engaged in the collection and sharing of private information with the US government. that they violated her right to privacy and they violated her right to confidential journalistic material. And so they awarded her a modest sum of damages. And Jennifer Robinson had her rights violated. Others in the legal team, we can presume, have had their rights violated, and yet that has not been confirmed. We know that there are people who are in the WikiLeaks organization have tried to confirm the extent to which security services in the UK have taken an interest in them, but they haven't been able to prove it. And Stefania Marizzi has tried to pry loose some of those records, still has not been able to obtain the records from organizations like the police and even the Crown Prosecution Service's role in it being implicated in abuses of process and of power. So here's Jennifer Robinson at the press conference.
My name's Jennifer Robinson. I'm legal counsel for Julian Assange and for WikiLeaks and have been representing Julian for over a decade. This is the outcome that we have been concerned about for the last decade. This decision is a grave threat to freedom of speech, not just for Julian, but for every journalist and editor and media worker in this country. He faces 175 years in prison for publishing information for which he's won journalism awards the world over and has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. This should shock and concern everyone, every citizen, every journalist, every editor, every media organisation. We will continue to appeal. This is not the end of the road, and we will use every appeal mechanism available to us to prevent this extradition. We continue to call upon the Biden administration to drop this case because of the grave threat it poses to free speech everywhere and across the United States. And we continue to call on the Australian government to take action and to protect this Australian citizen who is at risk.
All right, so that was Jennifer Robinson, WikiLeaks attorney, Assange attorney, and she has been representing them throughout many, many of their worst and most intense legal struggles against the U.S., which has had WikiLeaks and Assange in their crosshairs for over a decade. Sometimes there have been pauses, sometimes there have been lulls in the actions of the U.S. government, but they have never shut down or abandoned their focus on retaliating and doing something in response to the publications by Assange and WikiLeaks. And so if you go to thedissenter.org, I have published my report for this. I'll just put this up on the screen so that you can see the headline I went with was "Another Dark Day. The UK government approves Assange's extradition to the United States." And if you go there, I have this picture. I noticed that in a lot of the photos that are put out by Priti Patel, she has this wry smirk on her face. She seems to be an individual who's pretty pleased with herself. And I imagine she's pretty pleased with herself today and what they've been able to accomplish. The UK government has come full circle in their role as a client state for the US government. And that is what they are. And that's what they've been for the US government since at least 2003, if not earlier. You go back to when Tony Blair and his government were where President George W. Bush and Dick Cheney wanted them to be so that they could have someone, a very important partner to sell the war, to sell the invasion of Iraq. And the UK was there. And it seems like in the last 20 years, if the US government needed somebody to co-sign and be there to make it easier for the US to deflect responsibility, to avoid accountability, and to not take responsibility for bad decisions immoral decisions, unethical decisions, decisions that undermined and violated human rights, you'll always find that the UK government and its officials are there with as little political opposition as you find in the United States. So, not letting the US government off the hook, the reason why this is moving forward and Assange is moving closer to a US trial is because President Joe Biden, Attorney General Merrick Garland, and the rest of the US government, State Department, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's constantly making pronouncements about press freedom and democracy. You just heard him say many good words about respecting journalism and independent media at the Sham Summit of Americas last week, which we know are empty words given what's going on with the US government as they push forward and pursue this case. Uh, so we know they're behind this primarily, but then complicit, and we can say co-conspirators to use some of the language of this prosecution and turn it against the US, UK. We have co-conspirators. We have countries like the UK that are there and very much engaged in bringing forth this precedent that endangers journalism throughout the world, throughout the entire world. And so, what you get from the Home Office today is one, a total ignorance of all of the condemnation, all of the concerns that came from human rights and press freedom organizations. You had the Council of Europe and other European organizations that raised their voices and said, don't do this. And even though it has a hint of mealy mouthedness to it, the Australia government is saying that this is dragged on too long and it needs to be brought to an end. And they have tired. The Australia government has tired. They're not doing what they should do to protect Julian Assange and stand up for someone who is their own citizen, but they have grown weary and would like this to be over. And I think that says something, that their patience has become thin. And so now you have all of these organizations that came forward, the over 300 doctors, psychiatrists, and psychologists. They organized themselves under the banner of Doctors for Assange. They brought forward these concerns about his mental and his physical health condition, reminding her that he had a mini stroke last year while he's been detained at Belmarsh high security prison. All of this disregarded. There is no evidence whatsoever that Priti Patel ever considered any of the concerns that were brought forward. There's no evidence that she ever entertained a request from these organizations to have a meeting. There was a demand put forward by 19 organizations. We'd like to meet with you. We'd like to share our concerns about what's happening. So this is important. People need to know this. When you tell the story about what is happening with this case and you talk about why nobody speaks up, there are people who are speaking up. There are leaders and directors of these organizations that are trying to stop this and doing what they can. And what we're seeing is if they're not supporting the US or the UK's agenda or their collective agenda, then they are as marginalized and dismissed as many of us. As alternative journalists tend to be dismissed and minimized or marginalized, as common people, as people who are citizens of these countries tend to be dismissed if they raise their objections. They can't get a meeting. These organizations that are involved in human rights work or press freedom work could not get a meeting with Priti Patel. So you have a statement that was put out. I think it was a statement. It was put forward and published by The Guardian. It was in their coverage. It was at the bottom. I think it was circulated among the UK media. And it isn't even a fresh statement. It's not anything new. It's a regurgitation of the standard that is to be applied. I think it might even be pulled from the UK government's own website that describes the process for applying the extradition law in the UK. And I mean, I'll read it to you. There isn't any defense of this. There's no justification. This is a kind of cravenness that is unmatched. Under the Extradition Act of 2003, the Secretary of State must sign an extradition order if there are no grounds to prohibit the order being made. Extradition requests are only sent to the Home Secretary once a judge decides it can proceed after considering various aspects of the case. On June 17th, following consideration by both the Magistrates Court and the High Court, the extradition of Mr. Julian Assange to the U.S. was ordered. Mr. Assange retains the normal 14-day right to appeal. In this case, the UK courts have not found that it would be oppressive, unjust, or an abuse of due process or of process to extradite Mr. Assange. Nor have they found that extradition would be incompatible with his human rights, including his right to a fair trial and to freedom of expression. And then it goes on to claim that his health will be treated appropriately. I consider this a kind of vulgar paraphrasing of the legal criteria that's supposed to be followed. And I think it is pretty appalling that Patel herself can't put a statement out, that some spokesperson is on this. And that spokesperson, we don't even get to know their name. We don't even know who's the representative for the Home Office that is behind this decision. So all we have in this are a lot of bureaucrats who hide behind their office doors, and they do not come forward. They're not willing to put their name to this. Priti Patel is apparently unwilling to put her name to this. You make requests for information. The officials don't want people to know what they're doing, and yet the conspiracy unfolds. I mean, they very much are willing to call him out when there are publications that make their governments look bad. We've seen that repeatedly. If they want to discredit the publication of information, if they don't want to pay any mind to what has just been exposed that reveals war crimes or extensive corruption, then they can discredit it. They can say things like a foreign power was behind it. It was Russia. They can tie it to hackers. They can say that, in fact, there was a crime that was committed, and that's more important than the information revealed. But yet when they move forward and act upon their frustration and outrage towards Assange and WikiLeaks, they cannot defend it. And that is because what they are doing threatens the order that is supposed to be accepted among liberal democracies, so-called liberal democracies. The idea that you embrace human rights and that you support global press freedom. The kinds of things that are used to say that you are opposed to abuses of human rights in Russia and China and other countries, more autocratic and authoritarian countries. They become empty because you are signing off on this extradition request. I think internally they know that what they're doing is very difficult to defend openly. So they don't. So just like the Biden White House, you do not get a defense from Priti Patel, and you'll hear nothing else from the UK government today. They will treat this as a formality, as if they had no choice whatsoever but to approve the extradition request. But in fact, if you know anything about this case, you know that politics are at the core of this case. You know that this has gone on for over 10 years against Julian Assange, and that it began when WikiLeaks published reports exposing the Iraq War. They revealed that one of the major revelations was uncovering 15,000 civilian deaths that were previously unknown. We had the collateral murder video that showed the warfare that was being engaged in by U.S. troops and the way that people were targeted, even when they were rescuing. And Reuters journalists were killed in that video. And then you saw someone and his kids pull up in a van. They tried to rescue people who were shot, and then that van was shot up and blown to pieces. And then you have the Afghanistan war logs. You have revelations of people in Iraq looking the other way for torture, but then you have execution squads or assassination squads in Afghanistan that are exposed. You have the over 250,000 of diplomatic cables, and there's a long, long list of revelations from those cables that involve conspiring to not take action to address the threat of climate change, something people feel viscerally right now as heat waves hit the entire world, especially in the United States. And then you have things related to covering up the use of drones by Yemen. You have corruption in Tunisia and Egypt. The FBI supporting torturers in Egypt. You have all sorts of documents that point to the meddling in countries, supporting regime change operations in countries. And you have the Guantanamo files, detainee assessment briefs showing the faulty, the flawed, the nature of what was obtained through coerced and false confessions from people, a small handful of prisoners who were tortured by the CIA, gave faulty and false information, and over 700 prisoners, many of them. This became the basis for keeping them detained at Guantanamo Bay. And so this is everything. This is everything that is at the core of this case. And it made the U.S. government angry, but they never indicted him. The Obama administration did not indict him. They did not shut down the grand jury investigation. But then Donald Trump is elected. You have Jeff Sessions as the attorney general, who decides that they're going to revive all of this. They do this, and Mike Pompeo supports it and becomes obsessed with Assange because of the publication of the Vault 7 materials, which expose CIA hacking operations and the tools that are available to plant malware in our home devices, in our electronics, and to be used to go after targets. And that becomes a subject of debate as WikiLeaks publish those files. They say you've crossed the line. They equate it to a digital Pearl Harbor, which is absolutely ridiculous. But they're so animated and upset that you start to hear things like WikiLeaks is a non-state hostile intelligence agency. And they really go after WikiLeaks. Pompeo engages in a disruption campaign. There are secret war plans that are sketched out, and so on and so forth. And then that puts pressure on the Justice Department to charge Julian Assange. And so that is where we are now, is that the politics drove us into this moment. And now politically, there isn't a single person who will defend the prosecution of Assange. They're just letting the bureaucratic system take hold. And the gears keep grinding, and they're grinding Julian Assange down day by day by day. I think it is not inflammatory to suggest that they would welcome the death of Julian Assange. It would rid them of this case, something that they're not able to defend out in the open. It would mean that he would be gone, and they would get their wish, that they don't have to deal with him anymore. They don't really care about what he represents. They just don't want him to be able to live with his family. They don't want him to be able to conduct work as the WikiLeaks founder and to resume his position as editor-in-chief again. So they like this legal limbo. The legal limbo is welcome. I think they're okay with appeals. We could do appeals for another decade, and that would be okay, because they don't say anything, and they go on and act like it's just a way of life, that these legal hearings are sort of just the normal run of business within these institutions. Like the Assange case has become like monthly council meetings, kind of, and that Assange is the UK's prisoner, and then maybe soon he can be the U.S.'s prisoner, and then those proceedings can drag on and on and on. And maybe we don't ever get to a trial or a decision because of what they are doing in order to degrade and harm Julian Assange in his health. So uh, we are here on this dark on another dark day. It was already a dark day when this request was sent to the Home Office, and there will be much to discuss related to the appeal and what goes on after. But I'll cover that phase. Authoring a forthcoming book, Guilty of Journalism: The Political Case Against Julian Assange, which I mention just to say that this is going to be a guidebook that is available for these next phases of the case, along with some other work that is already out there. I mentioned that Stefania Marizzi has a book. I mentioned that I'll mention again that Niels Meltzer has a book that was put out as well. And if journalists, anyone can do anything to cover this, I think we all need to be bringing attention to this because of the impact that it has to our profession. We can't just let this case, I guess, sleepwalk its way, Joe Biden style, into the U.S. Justice Department's hands and then be started with an arraignment and then proceedings in the Eastern District of Virginia that can't be stopped. And so what can people do? Everyone, I see your comments. I'll just say thank you, Rob, for the super chat. Everyone who contributes, I really appreciate your support. What you can do for is, well, first off, make sure you're paying attention to the family of Julian Assange. Take note of the campaigning that Stella is doing, that Julian Assange's brother Gabriel is doing, with also Assange's father John shipped in, that they're doing. They've been touring the US. There's a film that I hope to be able to watch at some point, but it played in Australia on the campaigning that they've been doing. And then use this knowledge, use your awareness of what is going on in the case to object. If you get a chance to confront your congressperson or someone in the Senate, do it. Have that confrontation. Let them know that you object to what's going on. We hear very little from those in the legislative branch in the United States. There are occasionally reporters who ask the press secretary for the White House about this case. They get brushed aside. So people say all the time that, media don't care. No, media actually do ask questions when there's news breaking like today. It's possible that you could see someone from Al Jazeera English or another outlet ask I don't know her name, but this new White House press secretary that replaced Jen Psaki. And she's just going to give some boilerplate answer and brush that person aside and act like there isn't any reason why they need to take responsibility. But in fact, they can't pretend like they're not involved, because the State Department did get involved in this case. They didn't let the case run its course. They did exact influence over the outcome. They did take a step. They did make claims to the Foreign Office of the UK that were treated as reliable and meant that the High Court of Justice was comfortable in overturning the district court decision that had been made on humanitarian grounds to spare Julian Assange's life. So you can confront your member of Congress or Senate if you get a chance to attend some kind of Q&A session. The pandemic's over in the US, even though people continue to die and get infected. But so that means you can go to these public meetings. They're not just virtual panels anymore, virtual meetings on Zoom. So you can ask people questions. And if you see anyone out in public, ask questions. And if you can confront any of these people, if Attorney General Merrick Garland is going to do another commencement speech, maybe go there and demonstrate. If he's going to go to an event, demonstrate, challenge Attorney General Merrick Garland. Right now, he's riding high on his reputation of going after the January 6th committee, but don't just let him get away with having a pretty good image. This is bad. This is something that needs to be challenged. Same with the Biden White House. Anybody in it, ask them why they allow this Assange prosecution to continue. The charges can still be dropped. This all goes away if the charges are dropped. Everything we've said about Priti Patel will be something that citizens in the UK must be concerned about. Anything we say about Boris Johnson and his government and other people in the UK and the UK court system, that's a problem for those in the UK. But as far as the world goes, all of this is done and over with if the US government drops the charges against Julian Assange. I mean, the precedent has been set. It's dangerous because we've seen that the US government has charged a journalist and they believe they can pursue a trial against that person. They've appointed themselves the ability to decide who is and is not a journalist. And yet this goes away if the charges are dropped. So you can call the Department of Justice. There is a phone number. I do not have it handy, but it is not hard to find the line to call. You can overload their inbox with messages that may or may not be listened to. But I think that whenever you get the opportunity, if you do, to confront somebody who is connected to the US government and ask them, especially if they have some role to play in this, you should ask them about Julian Assange's case. And if they say they don't know anything and pretend like they don't have any responsibility for what's going on, don't accept that as true, because anybody who has a position in either branch of this US government is implicated at this point. The legislative branch has not done anything to oppose it. They encourage it. I think they have co-signed the idea that WikiLeaks is a hostile non-state intelligence agency, which is the CIA's point of view. And then the executive branch has, of course, been the purveyor of this prosecution against Julian Assange, coming from within the Justice Department, and then with the State Department helping to get it through the courts in the UK. So we have no credibility in the US today. And I'd say also people in the UK, there's no credibility for your country either. Any official that comes out today and condemns any human rights abuse related specifically to journalism, whether it's in Russia or China, Burma, maybe Indonesia, could be in Israel, but probably not. They're usually pretty cozy with them. Saudi Arabia, no, not anymore, because with the war in Ukraine, we need them, and the oil monarchy is indispensable to continuing the way things have now been ordered. So probably you're not going to hear them condemning Saudi Arabia. But let's shift to Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. Let's go to Mexico. Let's consider any number of African countries that they might be criticizing, maybe Ethiopia, Eritrea, Egypt. Go to the Middle East, Syria, Yemen, but probably not, because again, Saudi Arabia is bombing them and they're in famine because of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is helping the European countries, and the US wants their assistance to keep the war going in Ukraine. So probably not. But let's consider any of those countries, Turkey. And if you hear anything come from the US government or the UK government against abuses in the next day or two, a week, month, especially while this keeps going, there's no credibility whatsoever. Anything they say is laughable. If they come out and they say they're concerned, they're not, because they're doing this. They do not have principles. They have weaponized human rights, and those human rights, ideas, those values are useful for advancing their power, and they have shown through this case that if they do not want to uphold human rights, then they are perfectly happy with coming down on a journalist and putting them in a prison and then bringing them to trial. And they will end their work. They will make it impossible and difficult for their organization to function. They will shut them down. They'll recruit the PayPal. They'll ask social media platforms and other companies to quit, allowing them to have the ability to do their work. So they'll be removed, and they'll have think tanks and other organizations that help give them support, so that they can carry this out and have a kind of coalition that successfully pressures these companies into removing them and ending their ability to operate. And then they'll have lawfare. And that's what we've seen, lawfare in the UK. And it would presumably continue once Assange is brought to the United States for trial. So with that, I say thank you for tuning in to this broadcast. I must wrap up. I've got this interview to record with Stefania Marizzi, Italian journalist, which will be coming soon on this channel. And there'll be much more to report on. But for now, all I do is thank every one of you for tuning in and for following this broadcast. If you're sharing this work, I'm extremely grateful that you support independent journalism. Remember that independent journalists are diligently covering this case and are here to cover this case, while other corporate journalists and more establishment journalists have kept a distance and haven't done as much. So even if their editors in chief have opposed this, they don't do even enough to cover and keep people informed on the phases of this case. How many of them actually covered that the WikiLeaks attorneys or legal team, or even Jennifer Robinson has been spied on? How many of them actually even dig into the spying operation by UC Global with the support of the CIA that was conducted against Assange while he was in the Ecuador embassy? There's not a whole lot. El País in Spain, and that's a big newspaper. If you're in Spain, you would be informed. But around the world, and especially from Western media institutions, you're kept in the dark. There are independent media organizations and independent journalists that are doing exceptional coverage. And I just thank you for being there to support those people like us that are doing this crucial work. So with that, I conclude the broadcast, and I'll be back soon with some more here on this channel. But until then, see you around.